So, hi everyone, I'm Curran. Welcome to this stream, Get It Right in Black and White. I am super excited about this. This new series, which I'm calling Get It Right in Black and White, is going to be a long-running live stream series and course on data visualization with SVG and D3 and maybe other technologies we will weave in time. But that's the theme. A little bit about what this course is. I'm very excited to begin again from the beginning. I have learned a lot from teaching this course in 2018 and 2020. This is the 2018 version of the course, which was quite popular, and it's visualization with D3. This is the 2020 version of the course called DataViz 2020. It was recently published by Free Code Camp as a giant compilation. But having taught this entire course twice now, actually 3 times, the first time it wasn't public, I've learned quite a lot. And one of the main pieces of feedback that I've got from DataViz 2020 is that, that's cool and all, but how can I do all that stuff without React? So one of the key differences from the last year's version of this is that it's going to be oriented around pure D3, meaning figuring out all these visualization problems purely with D3, but coding it in such a way that if you wanted to, you could integrate with different frameworks. Another key difference is that this is going to be live. It's going to be like a TV show about data visualization. So you can tune in live to the event. I'm going to have, YouTube chat open, and I'll be responsive to that during the event. And I'm also inviting a small group of friends and special guests to participate with me live on the stream with their audio, so we can have direct discussions during this event. The reason why I'm doing this is because in previous courses, I was sitting there all alone making these videos, and if I forgot to say something or cover something, it would come up only, a week later. That's why I want to have this live element to it. This is a great opportunity to explain everything step by step. So there's lots of time here. I think this series, my intention at the moment is to have this series go for about a year. So this will be a recurring event every single Saturday for a year at this time. I might change the time, but there's lots of time. So there's no need to rush through anything. There's no need to skip anything. So I want to build up the viewer's understanding step by step, every step of the way. So that's the overall summary of this course. So, introductions. There are a couple folks here present in audio only via Google Meet. This is my sort of little, community of collaborators / learners. The idea is that these folks can step in, we can have discussions on the fly. I can be interrupted and be asked questions to go into more detail about whatever thing is happening. So why don't you all just introduce yourselves? I think I'll call on you one by one. Adil, you want to go first?
Sure, thank you, Karan. Hello, everyone. I'm Adil, and I'm very glad to be here. I'm based in the UK, and I work in the informatics department of a hospital. And my work is a bit SQL heavy, but I became enamored with D3 a while back, and I'm really excited to be learning it deeply. And I'm really happy to be here.
Nice. Welcome, Adil. Sriram Sharma is also here. You want to go, Sriram?
Sure. Hi. My name is Sriram. I used to be a journalist. Now I'm learning to become a front-end web developer. I've been following D3 through Karan's tutorials and been a big fan of his database 2020, database 2020, and even the 2018 series. So I'm really looking forward to this series as well, and just kind of uh, learning more from Karan on D3 as much as possible.
Nice. Yeah. Welcome, Shriram. And also, Nita is here. You want to go?
Hello everyone, my name is Neeta. I'm also very much interested into data visualization, and I see this live stream as an opportunity to learn directly from Karan. And his time is really valuable, but he managed to do this streaming, so I'm planning on getting benefited from it as much as I can, and I hope you all also get benefited from it. It's a really good series he's doing.
All right. Welcome, Nita. Before I dig into the content, I just wanted to say, if you're watching the stream or watching this, as an edited video later on, and you're interested in joining us, joining this small group, right now it's a small vetted group of people that will join me during the presentation, but I'm open to include more folks in the future, and also I will be having special guests for certain topics. If you're interested, please direct message me in the D3 Slack, which is a great place for the D3 community to sort of congregate. I highly recommend you join the D3 Slack if you haven't already. And if you're not part of this small group and you're watching on the YouTube stream, feel free to use the YouTube chat. I will be monitoring that. And the format that I'm thinking of doing is I'll lecture and actively do stuff for maybe an hour, and then there will be an open Q&A session after my presentation. At that point, I'll open up this audio-only meeting to more folks. All right, here we go. This is episode 1 of Get It Right in Black and White, SVG Fundamentals. What we'll cover today is what is HTML, CSS, and SVG. Adding an SVG element to an HTML page, creating circles, rectangles, and lines, adding text in SVG, and customizing the font with CSS. All right, so HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. This is the standard that defines the language of web pages that you see on the web. Every single web page is an HTML page. There's some source code that somebody wrote or that gets generated on the fly that has markup with those brackets and everything, and your browser loads that in and it parses that HTML page and then displays it in your browser. So when you go to a URL in your browser, that makes an HTTP request to some server. HTTP means Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That's the protocol, the networking protocol that web browsers use. So the browser makes an HTTP request to some server. That server comes back with an HTTP response that has a bunch of text, which is HTML source code. And then when that source code gets loaded into your browser parses it, meaning it interprets it, and then it does a whole bunch of stuff to make the web page appear. Within the HTML standard, there are APIs, application programming interfaces, that are sort of partitioned off. One of them is SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics. Another is CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. And another is JavaScript, which is often abbreviated JS. I'll go into detail on each of these a little bit. These Wikipedia pages are great. I would recommend to read them if these are new concepts for you. HTML hypertext markup language. It was invented in 1993, 28 years ago. That's very old. By Tim Berners-Lee. And it went through many, many revisions, and each revision introduced a lot of new features. Right now we're at HTML5, and this standard is maintained by this group called W3C, World Wide Web Consortium. So it's an open standard, and all these various browsers implement it. And this is what a very basic HTML page looks like. And I'll go into more detail later on the specifics. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It is a style sheet language, so it is its own different language that gets embedded within HTML. And it looks, see if I can find an example. It looks something like this, where inside of a style tag, these things are called tags, by the way. There's an opening tag and a closing tag. You can select elements on the page, like an H1 element, which is a heading 1 element, and you can set a bunch of properties on it, like the color, and there's many, many, many properties that you can use. This is very useful for styling things on the page. And when I say styling, I mean changing the color, the font, the size, all sorts of different presentation kind of attributes. SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. So scalable vector graphics, it's a way of representing computer graphics that is based on the geometries and the shapes. So for example, if you have the letter S and you zoom it in with SVG, because it's vector graphics, you don't lose any crispness because the graphics are defined in terms of the geometries themselves, points and lines that connect the points, as opposed to raster images like PNGs, bitmaps, JPEGs. These are images defined in terms of pixels. And a pixel is one of these little squares on your screen. So if you zoom it, the pixels will get blown up or blurry. Often when you scale a raster, it ends up getting blurry because the rendering engine tries to compensate. So that's what happens with raster images when you scale them. They get pixelated or blurry. That's because they're defined in terms of pixels, not the geometries. And this is one of the many reasons why SVG is really good for data visualization, because if you define a visualization with SVG Shapes, you can, for example, output that to a PDF and print it out, and it's very crisp when you print it. In a web browser, you can use the browser zoom and scale it, and it doesn't lose any clarity. That's one huge advantage of SVG. And also, it's generally easy to work with programmatically because it's got this DOM structure, which I'll get into. But you can define tags, essentially, in HTML for these different SVG shapes. So that's what HTML is in a nutshell. Any questions so far?
Sure. I was wondering, SVG elements, are they designed to create things that HTML can't do normally? Is that why SVG exists?
So the question is, can SVG elements do things that you can't do in HTML without SVG? Yes.
That's right.
Yes, that's right. I believe in the early days of HTML, SVG was not a part of HTML. and you were limited to things like divs to make shapes. And it's very limiting to just use divs and CSS to make graphics on the screen. So there are many, many, many things that you can do in SVG that you can't do in HTML without SVG. It's a massive library, essentially, of graphics capabilities. Paths, lines, areas, different ways of blending the colors together, all sorts of text utilities. Yeah, a great many things. And it's SVG has a history as an image format as well. So tools like Adobe Illustrator can be used to create SVG image files, which if you open up an SVG image file, you see the text. It looks a lot like HTML. It's actually, I guess, a subset of XML. So yeah, it does introduce a lot of capabilities to HTML that HTML does not have without SVG.
Thank you. Thanks, Karan.
And we'll get into those specifics and see what they are.
So in Wikipedia, it says SVG is an extensible markup language.
Yeah.
So I'm confused. Is a language itself, or it's just a tag in HTML?
Well, actually, if you read this text carefully, it says scalable vector graphics is an XML-based vector image format. So it's confusing how Wikipedia does this, but the way to parse it, it says it's extensible markup language based, meaning it's based on XML. And XML is a good thing to know about for context because it defines the structure of SVG and HTML. In a sense, HTML, it used to be at least a strict subset of XML. I think now there's some more language features of HTML than XML. But XML, I think, came first. So the comments that you see in HTML are derived or inherited from XML. The notion of tags with openings and closing is from XML. And so what it says in the Wikipedia article is that SVG is based on XML. See, I don't have any good example documents there, but just the fact that SVG is defined in terms of tags that can be nested, that's all that it means, that it's based on XML.
So HTML is derived from XML.
Yes, correct. But yeah, great question. Great question. I think I'll move on.
I think Shriram has a question.
Oh, did you, Shriram? Which chat?
No, I just had an observation. One was that like fonts which we use typically on the browser, they are vector based. That was kind of like a thing I realized because you can scale up the fonts without losing any quality. So that's like a realization that that's a vector based format, whatever type we import into our files when creating an HTML file. Another observation was that document formats that use the XML syntax. This includes like RSS, Atom,
Yes.
SOAP. So people might have used maybe RSS feed readers most likely. SOAP protocols is used more by developers, I think, who are making web API, things like that. So that's unlikely. But essentially, it's just following that same format. Even HTML is, I think, similar to the XML format in a sense.
Yes. Yep, it's very, very similar.
And another thing was that XML was considered to be the way that everything was supposed to be written, but then JSON came in, and JSON has become now the de facto way for applications to talk to each other.
That's
So
right.
what has happened is there's been a reversal of fortune, because XML is actually too verbose, and there's a lot of cruft in an XML document, which is kind of removed in something like JSON. JSON is more readable, which is why it's become more popular, is what I've heard.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I'll get into this when we start getting into like fetching data, but there is a long history to the idea of fetching data. It used to be that the only way to fetch data into the browser was to use XML files, and so that XML text would contain data, and nowadays people have migrated to use JSON instead, JavaScript object notation. But yeah, long story short, nowadays people use JSON, and XML is sort of a thing of the past, except for those legacy systems that still use it, like SOAP is using XML. I bet there's still a ton of software that uses XML as data interchange. But for new projects, yeah, the preference is to use JSON. All right, awesome. Thanks for the questions, everyone. Now, let's actually use these things to create some basic shapes with SVG. Now I'd like to get into the segment on creating stuff by writing code. And to do this, I'm going to use VizHub, which is this thing that I built over the past couple of years, essentially to help me teach my courses, and I'm trying to evolve it into a business. And it's quite an active community. There's 5,000 or so unique users over the course of its history, and there's a ton of content in here, and people are using it every day. So this is what I'm going to use for this entire series. And you too can use VizHub. So if you're following along with the live stream or watching this as a video, I encourage you to follow the steps that I'm about to do. So in VizHub, to start really using it, you have to sign in via GitHub. So I'm going to sign into GitHub. So now I'm signed in, and I can see my profile or Create Viz. So if you click on Create Viz, there are a lot of these templates here. The most popular template is just a starter HTML page, which is where we're going to start from today. So what I'm going to do next is fork this, meaning to make a copy of it that I can modify, and you can do the same once you're logged in. If you click on this little fork icon, you get this little pop-up that says, choose a name for this viz, and I'm going to say SVG Fundamentals as my name. So now I've got a copy of this, and I can click Open Editor right here to see this little browser-based IDE, essentially. IDE, by the way, stands for Integrated Development Environment. It's not an advanced IDE here by any stretch, but it lets you edit code right here in the browser. So if you click a file, it pops open, and you can see some details. I'm going to just remove stuff that we don't need because I really want to sort of start from the beginning here. And VizHub has all these options to, reclaim screen real estate. A lot of this stuff I built specifically for teaching. So here we have a very, very bare bones HTML page. Now I'm going to get into the details of what is a bare bones HTML page. First of all, we've got the doc type. This is a thing that tells the browser, okay, this document uses HTML version 5. And yeah, it's not strictly required. Like, I think it would work without it, but it's good practice, from what I hear, to include it. So once you've told the browser that we're using HTML5, then you can open up into this block of HTML. And so I just want to point out that the structure of HTML is, in general, you've got an opening tag and a closing tag. And a tag is defined by these greater than, less than things here. And a closing tag has this slash after the this less than symbol right here. And once you've got this opening and closing tag pair, you can put a bunch of stuff inside it, essentially developing a tree data structure. And that's what XML is. It's really a tree data structure, meaning there's nodes and each node has children. So when you define a pair of opening and closing tags, that's defining a node, a DOM node. DOM means DOM, document object model. So when this HTML page gets loaded and parsed and it runs in the browser in parsing this and running it creates this thing called the DOM, the document object model. And so this is the document, the source code, and the document object model is this data structure that gets created from this stuff. And so this is the root node of the DOM, which is a tree data structure. And then this root node has two children, the head and the body. So you can see it very clearly here. There's the head and the body. The head of an HTML page, it defines stuff that sort of is not directly visible on the page, but may have some side effects. For example, the title tag is a tag that goes into the head, and it's, I believe it's actually required to have a valid HTML document. So if you were to have a text file on your machine called index.html and double-click it and open it in the browser, the tab would say SVG Fundamentals. And to that point, I want to stress the fact that you can do all this stuff without using VizHub. So let me just show you what I mean. I won't spend too much time on this, but I want to stress that this is all using standard technologies, and there's nothing really VizHub specific about any of this. So if I make a new directory called test, I'm using Linux here, and I create a file called index.html, and I save this file. And then I open up this folder, you can see, okay, there is a file called index.html. And if I double click that, it opens in the browser. And check it out. It says SVG Fundamentals in the tab. So that's the role of the title tag. See all these different pages? They have different text in the tab. All of those are derived from the title tag inside of those HTML pages. And then, if you right-click in the browser, you can say View Page Source. You can do this on any web page. And it shows you the source code of that page, which was just loaded in from this text file on my machine. So this little diversion is just to say that you don't have to use VizHub per se. This is one of the complaints that I've gotten in my previous courses, like he doesn't tell us how to not use VizHub. VizHub is a tool that makes it easier to get started writing code right away without having to set up a local development environment. But for this SVG stuff, you don't need any development environment. You can just double-click the file, and it should all work. In VizHub, the title tag, it feeds into the title of the viz, which you see here on the page. Also in VizHub there's a file called readme.md, and I'm just going to delete all that stuff. This is just where you can add the description of this page. I'll type something here like a demonstration of SVG shapes. So the idea is you can use this readme.md to add a text description to your viz, and then you can close out the editor and then share a link. Like, this is just how VizHub works. You can share links to these things with other people, and then this page will load up without the editor open. All right, so now that we've got this basic page here, how do we create SVG shapes? Well, it turns out you can put SVG elements into the body. The body is the part of the HTML document that contains things that end up visible on the actual page. So just to give a little preview, if we say hello world right here, then hello world pops up in really tiny text on the running page. And for this sort of thing, I like to use the mini mode of VizHub, which will show the running page right there, and I can edit the text over here. So to create something with SVG, we can create an SVG element right here in the body. So we can have an opening SVG tag and then a closing SVG tag. And this opens up a world of possibilities because within this pair of opening and closing SVG tags, we can put tags that are not valid outside of SVG. For example, circle. We can put a circle right here, and again, it's all tags, so you have to have opening and closing. So we've got circle, not circle. I like to phrase, a lot of people phrase the closing tag as not. So you could say body, not body, SVG, not SVG, circle, and then not circle. But the circle doesn't actually show because there's no attributes of it defined. And in HTML, attributes are specified like this. CX equals 50. CX is the attribute that defines the center x coordinate of the circle in pixels. So if we set CX to be 50 and CY to be 50, we still don't have anything showing up because there's no radius defined. The radius of the circle you can define with R. So if I say R is 50, now we get a circle.
Karan.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Just to recap, an element, whether it's a HTML element or a SVG element, that is a group of tags. Is that right? It is the difference between element and a tag. Is that quite important to know?
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. It's real. Oh, thank you so much. This is so good. The distinction between element and tag is very confusing. I feel like a lot of people, even folks that have been doing this stuff for a long time, don't really grok what the difference is. So my understanding of what the difference is between an element and a tag is that a tag strictly refers to the text in the source code of the HTML. So this, when I select this text on my screen, that's an SVG tag, and that's a closing SVG tag. And then when the page runs in the browser, that tag, which is part of the source code, it's part of the text of the source code, all of these tags get parsed by the browser into this tree data structure called the document object model. And then in that document object model, the instantiation of that object is called the element. So this set of tags in the source code, when parsed, leads to the creation of an SVG element and a circle element inside of that SVG element. And you can see these elements using the Chrome DevTools, which is a really essential thing. So if I right-click here on that circle in Chrome and click on Inspect, it opens up what's called the Chrome DevTools. And you can arrange these however you like. I prefer them at the bottom. I'll make it bigger with Control+. So you can see here that this is the SVG element that's actually instantiated on the page. And see, when you hover over the SVG element, that little box appears. And that box, by the way, is the default dimensions of SVG when you don't specify width and height. You'll also notice that that box is not flush with the edge of the page. So all of these things we will be addressing. But yeah, to your point, the element is what's instantiated in the browser after the page runs. The tag is just the text in the source code.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So tags are used to describe what gets created at runtime.
Exactly. Yes. Yes, that's exactly right.
Thank you. Thanks, Karan.
Yep. And by the way, I want to highlight that these Chrome DevTools are so amazing because you can actually edit the DOM. So if I change CX to say 100 in the Chrome DevTools, the circle moved over. And if I change the radius to 500, here it gets bigger. It fills the entire space of the SVG. Because this SVG element has the default width and height, so we can set the width to be 960 and the height to be 500. These are the default dimensions inherited from blocks.org, which VizHub also uses. So what we're doing here is, I would call it manual DOM manipulation. So manually manipulating the document object model using the Chrome DevTools. And when you hear the term DOM manipulation, that's usually when a JavaScript program reaches into the DOM and changes it around at runtime. And that's what D3 does. That's what React does. That's what Vue does, Svelte, all these things. jQuery, the original, they all do DOM manipulation. And so that's another key distinguishing factor between tags and elements. I mean, a tag is just, it's static. It just gets loaded once from the source code. But an element, the instantiation of the tag, is dynamic, meaning it can change at runtime. So I'm changing it manually by, changing this text in the Chrome DevTools, but you can also make these same kind of dynamic changes using JavaScript. And we'll do that in future episodes. But now, if this program reruns again, if I trigger a rerun by editing it, all of those changes are lost. So at this point, I noticed some folks poking their head into this file. I saw Nita and Sriram in there in terms of their presence cursors. And I want to take this opportunity to open up this viz to be edited in real time by you all. So I'm going to go to the collaborators and add both of you. And I'll add Ideal too, just in case. So this is a feature of VizHub where you can give people permission to edit the document in real time. And I see some edits are already being made. Whoever's editing, you want to describe what's going on?
Yeah, I'm editing it. It's just so much fun.
Right? Wow, this is amazing. So, okay, a copy of the circle was made, and the fill was set to be red. This is perfect. Fill is an attribute of SVG elements that defines the color of the inside of the shape. And notice that the formatting is a little different. There's single quotes in use here, and there's spaces around the equal sign. But I've used double quotes. I just want to say it doesn't really matter in terms of how the program runs. But stylistically, you can unify all of this stuff with a utility called Prettier. Prettier is an amazing utility that automatically formats code, and it's built into VizHub. Oh, I see you just used Prettier. Nice. If you click this little colorful P, it auto-formats the code in VizHub to be consistently formatted. Wow, this is really cool. Really cool. So CX is 150 on the red circle, meaning it's moved over to the right. I want to clarify that the coordinate space of SVG, it has the origin in the upper left. So the upper left is actually the coordinate 0, 0. And then as x increases, the shape moves over, where's my screen? The shape moves to the right. And as y increases, the shape moves down. And the y direction is inverted relative to what you see in like math textbooks with graphs and stuff. Or in data visualizations, y typically goes up. So that's going to be, it's a source of confusion. Oftentimes when developing visualizations, y is flipped. So just to be aware, that's the coordinate space of SVG. So I see some edits are being made where there's a rectangle at x equals 400, but that's not going to show up because the SVG currently still has its default width and height. So I'm going to just change that by saying width is 960 and height is 500. Now the SVG should fill up the page, and it does. This is quite the little party going on here. We've got a green circle, we got a red circle, we got a rectangle. This is great. So let me just use Prettier on this so we can see clearly this rectangle. Rectangles are another, fundamental SVG shape. You can create a rectangle with the rect element. X and Y are the coordinates of the upper left corner of that rectangle. Rectangles can have width and height. These are all in pixels. And yeah, fill set to none means that the shape is transparent, that there's no fill inside of it. And stroke is an attribute of SVG elements that you could apply. You can apply to circles, rectangles, a lot of different shapes, and that's the outline. And so stroke equals blue means that this thing here has a blue outline now. And stroke width is what you can use to control the thickness of that outline. So if I set the stroke width to be like 20, we can see that that rectangle is actually the outer rectangle. And check that out. That outer rectangle is actually above the circles. That's another thing about SVG is that in SVG, you can't control the z-index by setting the z-index CSS property, which you can with other HTML elements. The z-index means which thing comes on top of which other things. The z-ordering is purely dependent on the ordering of the stuff in the document itself. So that's why this rectangle is on top of those circles. But check this out. If I move the black circle to be after that rectangle, see how it appears on top now? So that's why that's what I mean when I say the z ordering is determined by the ordering in the SVG document. And that becomes super, super important when you're in the weeds of making a visualization. It's like a fundamental thing that you really need to understand. So how about this? Let's collectively clean this up a little bit. These rectangles, let's have like one rectangle, one circle. Or no, it's multiple circles, or it's nice in a way. I also wanted to introduce the SVG element of a line. So you can have a line element, begin line, end line, and that line has x1. So if I put x1 at 0, y1 at 0, x2 at maybe 100, and y2 at 100, should create a line. It does not, and I believe that's because we have not set the stroke on the line. I think lines might be invisible until you set a stroke on them. There we go. Now you can see that little line.
Karan, I
Yeah.
noticed something earlier when the height of the SVG was, I think, maybe halfway down, and the nice big yellow rectangle was only half of it was showing. And I was wondering whether that meant you could create shapes and elements outside of that, outside of the width and height. Does that mean when one sets a width and a height on the SVG element in the SVG tag, sorry, that only shows a partial view of what's being created, or is it like a sort of a window, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's correct. See, if we were to change the width, for example, to be 400, or let's say 500, it clips everything that falls outside of that. So if you inspect the SVG element, you can see that it's bounded at this square, which is 500 and 500. The outer SVG element clips the things that are inside of it, because the browser gives the SVG only the screen real estate of its width and height. And the things inside of it may well be outside of that width and height. I mean, if we set X to 600, that rectangle is going to be totally off to the side, and it's going to get clipped out, and you won't be able to see it. So yeah, I mean, you can totally put stuff in an SVG that's outside the bounds of the width and height, and you just won't be able to see it. Yeah, and there's a similar construct called an SVG clip path that I think we'll get into a lot later on. But that with an SVG clip path, you can use these shapes to clip other shapes inside of it. Like say if you had a texture, you could clip the texture by a circle, things like that. I'll get into all that quite a bit later on. Oh, I see there's a path. Who made that path? I think it was Sriram. Do you want to talk about that?
Sorry, Karan. I was just actually playing around with an SVG that I downloaded from Icon Monster.
Nice.
And so I thought I'll just try and paste some elements out of it to see what exactly it's doing. Yeah,
Very
so
cool.
It's actually an element from this thing that just creates an X button, um, like a menu X button.
Nice.
So like we have these burger icons, right? Like which are pretty much now the idiom for menu.
Yep.
So I was just going through that. It was an SVG.
And did it work? Did it show up there?
Yeah, actually it did. I saw a small like line cutting across the black circle.
So that line, I believe, was the one that I had added. See, if I set the stroke width on that line, you can see it should get bigger there. I don't know if that path is visible. So let me do this. I'll inspect the element, and the path, somehow the path is not showing up there in the SVG. Is it valid? Oh, it's got a self-closing tag. I don't believe that's not valid HTML. It may be valid JSX, but in HTML you have to explicitly close the tag like this, not path. Now it should show up.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Like, it doesn't have closing tag.
There it is. Yeah. In straight HTML, a closing tag is strictly required, except for certain elements, like maybe an image element, IMG. I don't know, but yeah, there's that path. It is there. It's a nice little rounded line there.
Is there a difference between line and path, or is one based on the other? Because that I suppose one could use either thing to create a straight line like the line shown in path.
Yes, there's a huge difference. Line is just a straight line from point A to point B. Point A being x1, y1, point B being x2, y2. But path is a much more generic thing that you can use to construct all sorts of shapes, really. It's got this domain-specific language as part of it. So let me edit this path, because this string looks very cryptic. And when you have icons and stuff that are defined in SVG, you do have these cryptic strings that you can copy paste over. But these cryptic strings actually use a language. They use their own language. So I'm going to actually edit this particular string. I'm going to make some edits right in here to clarify how this little domain-specific language works. Let me preserve that one just so we have it as a reference. I'll make a new path. So D equals this domain-specific string that's specifically for SVG paths. M is the move to command. So M, if we want to move to, let's say, 400, 400, move to the x-coordinate 400 and the y-coordinate 400. It's like that. And then there's another command that you can issue, which is the L command, which is line 2. And this is how it works. Like, this is one command in this little domain-specific language. It means move to these coordinates. It's like putting a pen down. It's like move your pen to this place. And then L means line 2, means draw a line from that place to the other place. So if I say L 500, 500, it should draw a little line. And I believe I have to say I need to specify a stroke. So I'll say the stroke is black. And see there it is. There's that little line there, which is our path. And you may be thinking, well, that's the kind of stuff you can do with an SVG line. But check this out. You can add another line 2 command attached to that one. So let's say if we go L 500, 600, what does that do? Oh, it's actually off the screen. Let me just bring everything down. So move to 200, 200, line to 300, 300, and then another line to, let's say 300, 400. You can see that it has created this filled in shape there. And it's filled in because fill is automatically set to black. So if I say fill equals none, now it's just this this path here. And let me increase the stroke width too, so you can see it. So here's an example of a path that's actually comprised of two line segments. This is the first line segment, and this is the second line segment. And so this one here is actually that path element. And the path element is what is used to construct line charts, for example, that are data-driven. Instead of having a bunch of separate lines that are separate elements, you can just have one path element that is comprised of many lines. And same thing for area charts. If you just use the fill, it becomes this filled-in area. So you can use paths for areas and area charts. Paths are also used for geometries in maps, like the shape of a country or what have you. So I think that's all I really want to cover today. But I feel like that's a lot. Oh, and by the way, this is how you can make comments in HTML. Begin it with this exclamation mark and 2 dashes, and then end it with 2 dashes and a greater than symbol or less than symbol. Yeah, those are HTML comments. So I see there's some activity in the YouTube chat. Let me address those. There's a question, can you make layers, like circle on top of another circle? I see when I was talking, someone made that edit. And in fact, yes, you can see that there's the circle below and the circle above. And yeah, the layering is just purely based on the ordering of the document. So if I were to take this smaller circle and put it before, then it would be essentially invisible because it's actually behind the red circle, which we can see if we move it around a little bit. But yeah, that's how you would create layers, is by just making sure one comes after the other in the document, and the one on top is smaller, so you could see that what's behind it. Yeah, great question. Adil, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just curious about the path elements, specifically the D attribute. And I was just, is there a difference between the letters, if they're uppercase or lowercase, and is that something that you've had to do before to, because I'm not sure exactly what the difference is, and it'd be I was just wondering if you.
Sure. Yeah, let's find out. If I make it a lowercase m, it seems to still work, and a lowercase l. Oh, looks like that did something different, actually. So it appears it is case sensitive. To learn more about this, I would suggest the MDN article about SVG Paths, because it's an entire language. It says the D attribute is a value of string. It is animatable, yes. And somewhere in here, yeah, here it is. These are all the path commands. So there are a ton of these path commands. But more often than not, you don't need to construct these commands yourself because there's some utility that generates it. Often you encounter these like if you want to put icons into your SVG, you can you can copy paste these paths from an icon SVG file. With data visualization, there's a package called D3 Shape that we'll use later that actually generates these strings for you. So usually you can treat this D attribute as a black box that you don't really need to know about. Like, you don't really need to understand it. But I wanted to go into a little detail now because it's good to just know the structure of it. And I see in this example there are spaces. Like, I think it could have spaces in it and it would be fine. Yeah, it works just the same. And I feel like I've seen space delimited coordinates. Yeah, that works too. You don't even need the commas. So there is some flexibility there in terms of the structure, but it looks like it is case sensitive, maybe uppercase L and lowercase L. Honestly, I don't know. They might be different commands or something.
Yeah, I think it
Yeah,
says absolute versus relative coordinates.
It could be.
Just in the note just below where you're highlighting.
Ah, yes. Oh, look at that. Uppercase is absolute and lowercase is relative based on the differences. Oh, that's quite interesting. So let me just see if I really understand that. In our path, we've got a move to command, and let's see, this second line to command, it uses the absolute coordinates 300, 400, but if we were to rephrase that in terms of relative coordinates with the lowercase l, the change in x would be 0 and the change in y would be 100. And we get the same result. Yes, that's what it is. Nice. Nice. I'm actually learning that just now. So thanks for that. Oh, there's a question in the YouTube channel. Did you say there was a Get It Right in Black and White channel in the D3 Slack? Yeah, you know, I was going back and forth mentally about how I wanted to deal with the asynchronous communication for this. And what I've decided is, for now at least, I want to try to use the VizHub Forum for these communications, not the D3 Slack, mainly because the D3 Slack is very transient. But if you feel strongly, let me know. I mean, I may end up creating a D3 Slack channel for this series. I'm not sure, but I used Slack in the past for the DataViz 2020 series, and there was so much really great activity in the D3 Slack that is currently gone forever, lost to the sands of time, because Slack doesn't preserve its history with the D3 Slack, which is on the free plan of Slack. So that's why I want to use this VizHub Forum thing instead. So, in the YouTube stream, there's a link to the blog post about it. And in the blog post, there's a link to the forum index. And the forum index looks like this. This is a page that I plan to maintain that will have an index of all the resources for all of the episodes. And right now there's just episode 1, which doesn't really have anything in here yet. But this is what I want to leave you with. As we close out today, I want to leave you all who are watching with an exercise. This is another differentiator between this series and last series. I want to give exercises at the end of each and every episode so that you all can engage with this stuff and try your hand at it and share your work. And hopefully we'll build up a community of people who are following this series and participating. And so here's what I want you to do. Make something creative with basic SVG shapes. And do that by, fork the hello HTML example, or you can fork the example that we made today And I'm just going to remove Collaborators right now so we can like freeze it the way that it is as a record of today. And so you can fork this viz to do your exercise. And by the way, in this VizHub Forum software, which is an instance of Discourse, what you can do is put a VizHub link on its own line, and it will unfurl to include a thumbnail. So when you share your work, that's what you can do. Let me just sign in so I can edit. So you can fork this example, and what I'm going to do is drop that VizHub link on its own line, and you see what happens here. It unfurls. So yeah, that's what I'll leave you with today. If you followed along, enjoyed this, please go ahead, fork this thing, modify it, and share your work here. And feel free to ask questions also in this forum thread. I'm hoping that this forum works out well as a platform for discussions and stuff. If it doesn't, I might introduce a Slack channel, or a Slack channel might be good to have anyway. I'm not sure. We'll see. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, we're almost at time here. So thank you everyone for joining, for watching. Any last questions, folks in the meeting?
I'm good. Thanks, Karan.
Nice.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you. Thanks, Karan.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah, I hope we can do this every Saturday for a long time and get really deep into all sorts of things. So
That was fun. Thank you.
my pleasure. My pleasure. All right. Thanks, everyone. I think I'll sign off, and I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.